No matter what, people will commit to misunderstanding you. What's most important is your commitment to understanding yourself. Hello, you guys. My name is Inkerika Madani, known as NK, and welcome back to Misunderstood. So you want to move to New York City. I've been wanting to do this topic for a bit now, and I thought it would be the perfect time as I have just moved into my third New York City apartment. And honestly, if you would have asked me 3 years ago if I was going to be in 3 different New York City apartments, I truly would have laughed at you because all I wanted back in 2022 was to finally make this move. We made this move at the top of 2023, and I'm so happy that I did. But before we get into any of that, take some time right now to rate this podcast, Misunderstood, 5 stars. Rating the show helps so much. It is a free and easy way that you can help the continuation of this podcast. I'm really happy with the viewership. I'm happy that you guys are enjoying each episode, and I love bringing them to you each week. So with that said, if you have not already, please take some time right now to rate Misunderstood 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are listening. Thank you so much. A full disclosure, I am sitting on the floor of my apartment. I am exhausted. It is nighttime. This is actually my first ever podcast recording at night. I've never recorded at night. It's not really even that big of a deal. It's just I'm learning more and more about myself that I am truly not a night person. I want to be in bed by 10:30 and it is 9:50. So not sure how long this is going to be. This is also going to be very much a stream of consciousness. I didn't write anything down for this episode. I really just wanted to go off of vibes and go off of how I've been feeling in New York, but also literally backtrack and paint the picture on how I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. Yes, you heard that right. If you're coming across me for the first time, hello and welcome. I made a cross-country move by myself at the beginning of 2023. We can unpack that, which we absolutely will, but what I will say is still to this day is the boldest thing I've ever done in my life. I'm 30 years old, and that is still the biggest, most nerve-wracking, scary, exciting thing I have done so far in my life is pick up and move across the country, uproot my entire life. Everything I have ever known was in the West Coast, and I said, I want to be an East Coast girl. I want to just try it out. Back then, I did not know. I truly did not know what was going to happen. I did not know what this journey would entail. But what I do know now is that by me taking that journey, taking that very scary leap of faith, it opened so many doors for me, not just professionally, but within myself. My independence, my confidence level soared when I decided to move to New York City. I also want to preface that although the title and the topic of today's episode is New York City specific because I live here, I want this to apply to anybody who is making a big change in their life. Anybody who might be doing the same thing that I did a few years ago and uprooting their life and moving across the country, maybe to a different city, even if it's in the same state. It doesn't matter how far you're moving. It's not about geography. It's not about distance. It is about moving somewhere that you feel very called to, right? A few episodes ago, I did talk about your energetic city. I fully believe that New York is my energetic city. New York is the city that I feel most alive. It is the city that I feel like I can do anything, and that is actually why I moved here. Most people ask you, why did you move here? It's just one of those questions that always gets thrown around in daily chit chat and conversation, and every single time I get asked that, part of me wants to make up this intense answer of work or family, whatever, but I am so privileged to say that I just decided I wanted to come here. I was in a place in my life a few years ago that I had the means to make this huge monumental move, and I took it. I took the opportunity. I seized the opportunity in front of me. I guess we can just say that's step one, seizing the opportunities that are in front of you. All right, I posted a TikTok recently saying, don't let your biggest regret in life be, I wish I did that when you had the chance. That applies to literally anything that you've been wanting to do, but specifically for me, that meant seeing the world, and that meant moving, and that meant trying something new, trying something out of my comfort zone. New York City was definitely out of my comfort zone, and I will say say right now, there are so many ways it still is. And this is 2.5 years into living in New York City. But it is the place for me. And I know this is a place that so many people crave. I also learned this before I even moved to New York City. There is an aesthetic with New York City that everybody is interested in, everybody is craving. There's so many people who are just purely fascinated by the lifestyle, by how people live here, by how people move here, the arts, the restaurants, everything. There's so much to New York City that is so unique, unlike any other place in the world, with our subway system, with how people walk everywhere, where you can literally try a new restaurant every single day for, I think it was 7 years, and you still would not go to all the restaurants in New York City. How wild. That is just a few little fun facts that I have learned throughout my time here that I believe add to the lore and add to the excitement and add to the fun and add to the mystery and the beauty of the city. And I wouldn't have it any other way. All right, now let's go back in time. Let's go back in time. I do want to explain where my head was at when I moved so that you guys can start to also paint the picture. If you are in a position that you want to move, then this will directly apply. Or if you just want to hear a fun little story about how NK moved to New York City, here we go. I mentioned this in a previous episode, how I came here on a solo trip in 2021. This was in September. If you don't know, September and October are the best months to visit New York City. So that further allowed me to really envision myself here. That's half of it. Okay. And in this episode, I want to talk about the excitement and the magic of the city, but also I want to equally talk about the reality, because I myself came here with the magic. I still have the magic of New York City, and I'm really happy that I do 2.5 years later. But the reality hit me like a truck really, really early on, and it allowed me to really understand that New York is this really cool, fun, exciting place. But at the same time, there are flaws to every city, and New York definitely has some. So I came here in 2021. Came here by myself on that solo trip. I wanted to envision myself living here. Every other time I had ever been to New York, and by the way, I had been to New York 6 times prior to 2021. I needed to figure out how it felt by myself, because all those other times I was with other people and I wasn't able to feel super independent. But coming here in 2021 by myself allowed me to act like I was in a simulation. I actually stayed in a hostel in Chelsea. It's called the Chelsea International. This was 4 years ago. So I was 26? Thought that it was in an amazing area. It was in Chelsea, which is still one of my favorite areas. And at the time, I really wanted to move to Chelsea. So I wanted to find somewhere that I can stay in a neighborhood that I was interested in, be able to go outside, walk around, grab a coffee, go to the grocery store. I was here for, I think, 5 days. So that was a good amount of time to just start to get my feet wet. You will never understand anywhere as much as when you live there. No amount of visiting New York City would have ever fully prepared me for living here. Okay, I could have come here 100 times in a visit, but none of that would have equated to living here. I had to dive in, make that decision and dive in on my own and see that through. But what I will say is, when I visited, I truly was able to walk around and try to grab a slice of the New York City lifestyle that I was so craving. And that was the trip that solidified it. As I mentioned in a previous episode, I was on the Brooklyn Bridge, looked back to the Manhattan skyline, and I started crying. And for me, when I'm crying, it could mean two things. One, I'm sad, or two, I'm so overwhelmed with emotion in a really positive way that I just start crying. And I was in a good mood. I was happy. It felt like an epiphany. It felt like, oh, wow, I think I just realized the next chapter of my life. And that's a really powerful feeling, to literally feel it in the moment. That's why I was crying. I said, I'm going to live here one day. That started it all. All right. So you're probably thinking, okay, amazing. We love that for you. But how did you actually get here? Super valid question. So let's now talk about the logistics, literally how to get from point A to point B, because anybody, truly anybody, can talk about a story about why they fell in love with anywhere, why they fell in love with New York, of course. But how did I actually get here? So I think I mentioned this in episode 4. It was the Take a Chance on Yourself episode. I believe that's number 4. It might be number 5. Again, we are freestyling this episode. I did not write anything down. We are going off of vibes. But I did mention in that episode a little bit about my progression through my career. I started content creation back in technically 2020. However, I did not do it full time until 2021. Back in 2020, this industry was still so confusing. Honestly, we're in 2025 and it's still a little bit confusing, but definitely not as confusing as it was in 2020. I dove in, I absorbed, I felt like I was a sponge. Hours and hours, I was learning the ins and outs, the SEO, the content creation, how to vlog, how to use my tripod and take photos. I literally did it all back in San Francisco. And yeah, I was made fun for it by so many people, but you know what? It doesn't matter because what I did then truly afforded me the lifestyle I have in New York. So I'm very thankful. Back in San Francisco, I was doing freelance photography. I started 2 small businesses. I was doing freelance writing. I was doing freelance videography, doing a lot on Pinterest as well. And back then, Pinterest was doing really, really cool things with creators. So I got in really early on some of the programs, which definitely skyrocketed the amount of money I made as a content creator. I also started an online business to help others learn how to create content, which I still have that business to this day. Things were going well for me. Things were going very, very well for me on my social media career front. I was really, really, really careful with my money, mind you. Back in San Francisco, I also was only paying $11.65. I know that's such a weird number, but that was my rent for 3.5 years. I was paying $1,165 of rent every single month in San Francisco. I was with roommates and I was making honestly a shit ton of money from content creation, and I saved because I knew one day I'm going to move to New York City and I'm going to need all this money, so we got to save this. So I saved a ton of money, let me tell you. I think I saved at that point, I had like $3K saved, and I was so proud of myself. Some of that was invested, some of that was in a few other places, but I knew that I had more than enough to move to New York City. By the end of 2022, I had saved so much money, and I was really proud of that. And I knew this is my New York money. I need to not touch this because I know that I need to have a New York chapter. And I did promise myself this. I promised myself this in 2021. I said, I must live in New York in my 20s. I must. I literally must. There was no going around that. There was no circumventing that. There was no alternatives. I said, if I don't live in New York City in my 20s, that will be the biggest regret of my life. And again, we all are living our own lives and we're all doing our own things and we have our own passions and we have our own wants. That was mine. And no one can tell me that's wrong because it's my fucking opinion. I wanted it so damn bad that I was literally saving so much money to be able to actually make this move. Okay. So I had the will to move. I had the money to move at the end of 2022. Then I needed to figure out how I was going to find apartments while I'm literally in San Francisco. And I was not willing to fly across the country to be looking at apartments. That's just not feasible. That's feasible to some people, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're in that position, it doesn't even make sense to try to fly across country just to see apartments. I fully believe that is a waste of a flight. That's my truth. So what I did is I scoured YouTube, watched so many New York City apartment tours, and I would take note of the realtors and the brokers these big creators were referencing and talking about every single time that they posted. Because if they're using them and they are backing them, obviously they're reputable. Yes, I have to do my own research, which I absolutely did, but that was a great starting point. So, highly recommend going to your favorite YouTubers and consulting them because obviously, if they're doing what you want to do, they're a great resource. I found a realtor through a YouTuber and I reached out to her. We got on a phone call. We talked about the preliminary things I wanted for a New York City apartment. And I was starting from ground zero. I had never been inside a New York City apartment. Actually, I have been to New York 7 times at that point, but I was in hotels, I was in Airbnbs. I had never, ever been in a New York City apartment. So it was very cool to get to learn about what New York City apartments entail. And as we know, there are so many facets of apartment hunting. There are so many pros and cons and things you have to think about. And she guided me through everything, which is great. Also, just a little plug, I have shouted her out on my YouTube vlog and we actually got to do a Q&A about apartments, apartment searching. Definitely go subscribe to my YouTube channel and go into the New York City apartment hunting series. I have different playlists on my channel. Anyways, so I remember telling her some of my pros and cons, my non-negotiables, things I wanted, the amenities, what have you. One thing to fully keep in mind about New York City apartments is there is actually no perfect apartment. You can have a list of amenities and you can have a list of wants. However, there is probably a 0% chance, and that is just me being a realist. I'm not even trying to sugarcoat it. There is going to be something, or maybe even a few things that you don't get in your apartment. However, you will get other things. It is about what you're willing to give up for what you're willing to get. For my very first New York City apartment, I was living in Midtown East. I was on 53rd and Lex. The pros of that apartment, it was a pretty large space for one person. And also, this was my first time living by myself. That was really special. I come from a huge family. I'm one of 5 siblings. And then also I have lived with roommates forever in college, post-grad, all up until 28 years old when I moved to New York City. So this was a very big deal for me and I wanted to really lean into this new chapter of living by myself. So the apartments I was looking for were 1 bedrooms in Manhattan. We got to tour virtually a ton of different apartments, but the one that I actually picked was on 53rd and Lex. Pros about the apartment, like I said, huge apartment space. There was a very large living room area, tons of natural light. Cons, very small bathroom. Literally only one person can fit in the bathroom at a time. The bedroom was barely a bedroom. They said it was a junior 1 bedroom, but literally it could barely fit my queen size bed. And then also there was only one closet in the entire space. That was an adjustment. That was hard for me to navigate. However, we navigated it and I loved that apartment. I loved it for what it was, although there were things that I didn't love. I loved the proximity. The train station was literally half a block away. I could get literally anywhere in Manhattan or outside of Manhattan in less than 20 minutes. It was a good first New York City apartment. However, I knew that after that lease, I did want to go elsewhere. So my next apartment was a studio, and this was the first time I really learned about studios. I didn't really know what a studio in New York City looked like because I never toured one until this go around. The studio that I was in was a very unique studio. It was actually bigger than most studios, and it had a ton of beautiful natural light. It had a view of the Empire State Building. It had an updated kitchen, an updated bathroom. It had 3 closets. Amazing. However, it was a little further away from the action of New York City in my eyes. And I think that was one of the biggest drawbacks. But again, I loved that apartment for what it was. I loved that the apartment allowed me to rest and heal and slow down. It was what I needed again in my journey. and now I am living with roommates. We're throwing it back to San Francisco. I used to live with roommates, but at this point in my life, I really wanted to make that step to save money for the future. Save money so that I can invest in other properties and potentially buy a house, hit other goals that I want to do in the next few years. So that was a very strategic, conscious decision. And honestly, I had been thinking a ton about how much money I am spending in New York City. It is actually egregious. It makes me want to cry how much money I'm actually spending each and every month. And I just think that I can use that money towards other things. But at this time in my life, I also really want to lean into being in New York, specifically in Manhattan. This is the place I fell in love with New York City. And I understand New York City is 5 boroughs, but for me specifically, my love story with Manhattan is just simply not over, and I needed to make it work. If you listening want to have your own slice of New York City, have your own piece of the pie, I highly recommend making it work however you can. Okay. I think there is a huge stigma, and I fell into this. I want to say this right now. I fell into this at the beginning of my New York City journey. Back in 2023, I moved into a 1 bedroom because honestly, I wanted to prove that I could, but I felt like I also subconsciously wanted to prove it to other people as equally as I wanted to prove it to myself. There's so much content around New York City living and apartment hunting, and I wanted to be a part of that. I felt like, well, if I'm living here now, I get to be a part of this thing that seems like this trend that everyone is hopping on. And I'll be honest, I think I got swept away. I think I got swept away in the hype of it rather than figuring out what is going to work for me, what is going to make me comfortable in New York City. Because New York City is not a comfortable place. It is a fun, amazing place to live. It is not a comfortable place, and you need to do what is comfortable for you. I had the means to do it. That doesn't mean I should have done it the way I did. Okay. After reflection, after maturing and understanding all sides of my situation, I look back and I think I didn't have to spend $2,500 a month on an apartment. I could have done something different, but I'm also here to set the record straight. I do not regret anything that I've done so far in New York City in terms of where I've lived, because each of the places I've been has told a story and has helped me develop my own story, who I am. And it was all so worth it. But what I will say to you is don't fall into the BS of needing a specific type of aesthetic and needing something very specific out of your living situation. Because at the end of the day, when you come to New York City, you are here to live in New York City. Go out into the world and actually have a slice of this lifestyle that is so infectious and so fun and so great. It doesn't really matter where you live. Yes, you should be safe and comfortable, but I guess comfortable is what you make it, but you know what I mean. You need to focus on the essence of the city, focus on how you are going to actually make the most of your time here rather than specifically living here. Living here is half of the equation. I mentioned this in a previous episode. The cost of entry to accessing this lifestyle is New York City rent. That is the barrier to entry. That is the cost of entry that dissuades so many people. I understand. It took me 28 years to be able to finally do this on my own, and I'm so damn proud of that. But I also recognize that there are so many ways that you can do this and make it feasible. I'm just telling my story of how I got here, but there's so many ways that you can make this feasible. There's so many apps that I've learned about, like Rent Hop. There's obviously Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. There are avenues and resources at your disposal that are free that you can find roommates. With roommates, you are obviously paying significantly less rent than you would if you were living by yourself. I am very, very, very excited to be saving hundreds of dollars on rent. That is my dream. And to be in a new area in New York City that I've never been and to lean into the city so much more. I said this in the past episode. I feel like I have been holding back and I don't want to do that anymore. I came to New York City with a goal of living my best life. I have had so much fun in New York thus far, but there's still so much more fun to be had. And I know that. I know that deep down, which is why I made this very specific decision in my life. And I'm so excited to see how this new chapter in New York City unfolds. So to recap, first and foremost, figure out your will to live here. This place is not for the weak. This place has toughened me up significantly. I haven't lost my spark and I will never let anywhere take my spark from me, but it is a tough city to live in. So you really need to assess what is your will to live here, and you need to come here on your own specifically to assess that, please. Everyone can get very blindsided and very jaded if you come somewhere with other people because you're feeding off of their opinion rather than your own. Just my 2 cents to assess how you personally feel about New York City before you actually move here. Secondly, you got to get your money up. You got to get your funds up. This place is so damn expensive. Every single time I pay rent, I cry a little bit, but I know why I'm doing it and that keeps me going. So definitely save, save, save. Start now. If you want to move here in 2026, we are in August right now. There is ample time to absolutely make that happen. And then third and final, decide what type of living situation you are willing to be in. There's nothing wrong with living with roommates. You also don't have to be besties with your roommates. You just have to have a cohabiting relationship, a respectful, cordial relationship. Please remember to emphasize the fact that you are living in New York City. You aren't coming to New York City to pay rent and be in your apartment 24/7 because you can go anywhere else in the world. You don't need to be in New York. Actually, that would be dumb if you just came here to do that. You come to New York City to enjoy. You come to New York City for opportunities, for fun, for access and experience. And the only way that you are going to be doing that is if you get outside and go live your best life in New York City. And with that, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Misunderstood. Please remember to rate the show 5 stars on Apple and Spotify. Remember to join our Geneva group chat. It is always linked in the description of every single podcast episode. Hang out with me on my other socials, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Pinterest at NK Madani. And I will talk to you guys in my next one.